I'm Michelle from Muchly Paper Blooms. Welcome back to the next part in my paper flower bouquet series. Today I'm going to be actually arranging my paper flowers into a bouquet, and I'm going to be using all of the flowers and all of the techniques that we've learned together over the last few weeks. The flowers I'm going to be using are some peonies, some hibiscus, some chrysanthemum, some plumeria, and obviously some foliage. And if you followed along previously, you'll know that I've already planned out my quantities and the colours of those. I also decided on my vase and some filler material. And so I'm pretty much ready to go today. I just actually need to arrange them now. So hopefully you're also at the same stage and you've got all your flowers ready to go and you can arrange your bouquet with me. If you did miss any of the tutorials so far, then maybe go back and watch those first so this makes a bit more sense. I will pop a link up above for you so you can go back and watch those, and then make sure you come back here to continue making your paper flower bouquet with me. Before we go any further, I would love it if you could also hit the subscribe button. It massively helps me out and it means I can keep bringing you these tutorials. Also, don't forget, if you missed any of my templates for my paper flowers, then I have those available on my website, which is muchlypaperblooms.com, and I'm going to be adding new templates and tutorials there all the time, so make sure you keep an eye on that. While you're there, you can also sign up for my email list if you like, and then you'll be one of the first to know when I launch new flowers, and also to keep up to date with general Muchly Paper Blooms news. So today I'm going to be making quite a large vase. Obviously, when we were designing it, I knew I wanted it to be a centerpiece from my dining table, and I know that I want something which is going to be viewed from different angles. So I'm going to make sure that it's visually pleasing from all angles. If this was going to sit in a corner where you don't even really see 2 or 3 sides of it, then I would focus more on the front and maybe just the sides. But for me today, I want something that's going to look great from all angles. So what I'm going to do is make sure I equally space everything out, so that even if I look at it from a different angle, it's going to look great no matter what.
So the first thing that I like to do is just to arrange everything out on the table, just so I can see what I'm working with. You don't necessarily need to do this step, this is just how I prefer to work. And I like to have my vase and filler material first of all, and then I start with the biggest flowers and work my way down to the smallest ones and the foliage. I just group those by type just so that it makes it easier for me when I'm putting them into the vase. Then you want to add your filler material into your vase. So I'm using crinkle cut craft paper. So if you're doing a large vase like this, then you want to put quite a bit in there. I've got a few handfuls of it here. And just make sure to squash that down as you're working. You don't want to compact it too much though, so don't press down too hard. And add that so that it comes to about 1 inch or 2 from the top of your vase. You'll be able to tell if you have the right quantity of filler material in your vase based on whether or not your stems will sit in it. If there's too much, then you'll struggle to push the stems into it, and you won't be able to arrange them even with a bit of compacting down. And if there's not enough, then they'll just rest on the side and there won't be any support for the actual stem. So just play around with it until you get the right amount in there, and just add little bits at a time until it feels a bit stiffer, and then you can get your stems to sit within it. If it is the right consistency, you may still need to push your stems into it, maybe with a little bit of force, but as long as once it's in, you can then position your stems easily, then that should be about right. So the first flowers that I'm going to add are my peonies, and the reason I'm choosing those first is because they're the biggest flowers. So they're going to have the most impact, but they're also going to take up the most space in my bouquet. So I'm starting with my 3 peonies, and I'm just going to position those roughly about thirds around the vase. So it doesn't really matter if the positions are not exact, as long as they're roughly in the right place, and that's a good way to get started, and then we can always tweak them as we go on. If you have more than 3 peonies at this stage, you can also add more. So if, for example, you're going to add 5 peonies in total, you could do one of 2 things. So you could either add 5 and equally space them around the vase in the same way as we've done with these 3, or you could add 3 here and then keep 2 to one side, and you can put those into the centre of the vase when we're a little bit further along with it. I also like to add a little bit of bend onto my stems as I'm pushing them into the vase. So next up I'm going to add the next biggest flower, so in my case that's the hibiscus. I'm going to place those so that 2 similar colours are not right next to each other. So for example, this yellow peony shouldn't be directly next to the yellow hibiscus. And then I'm going to put the dark pink hibiscus in between the pale pink peony and the lemon yellow peony. So that just helps to break up the space between them, gives it a bit more contrast. You don't want all the pinks in one side and all the yellows on the other side. That's going to look a bit strange. So you want to make sure that they're not necessarily equally spaced, but just spaced out enough that not all of the same colours are right next to each other. Another little trick for you, especially if this is one of your first paper flower bouquets, when you're measuring your stems and you want to check the height of them, particularly if we're in a specific vase, if you know exactly what height you want them to be, then you can just go ahead and trim those with your pliers. But sometimes, especially in cases like this, you're not entirely sure where the finished flower is going to end up. So you don't necessarily want to do something as drastic as trimming it that is then a bit of a pain to fix later down the line if you need to make it taller, for example. So what you can do, particularly if you have filler material in a clear vase or if you have a solid vase, is you can just bend the end of your wires over like this. So I just bend those over with my fingers, or you can use the pliers if you prefer. Just squeeze those two bits of wire as close together as you can do so that they don't form quite a big chunky base. And then you can adjust those as much as you need to get the height right within the vase. So then you can just keep playing around and pushing those into the filler material until you get the height that you want. And that way you're not really committed. If it doesn't quite work, you can just take it back out and then unfold it or tweak the height as much as you need to do. So you can see here this hibiscus was a little bit too tall. So I'm just going to take that back out, unfold the wire, and then fold that over again to get the height that I want, and then try again with it. When you're putting your stems into the vase, try to position them towards the centre of the vase and then bend your wires over rather than putting them right on the edge, because that's going to give you a better shape, especially by using the neck of this vase because it fans out. So it's going to help you to create that round shape that we talked about previously. And also, if you're using a clear vase with filler like me, then you don't want your stems right at the edge because they'll start to poke through the filler material and you'll see them when the display's finished. So you'll see I'm adding my hibiscus in between each of the peonies, and I'm left with a few different colours, but I'm going to make sure I try and pick the more contrasting colours to sit between each of these. So I have two hibiscus that are kind of coral coloured, and that would end up sitting right next to a coral coloured peony. And the other hibiscus that I have is another bright yellow one, and obviously I don't want those sitting next to each other. So instead of choosing those, I'm going to choose this bright pink one instead. And again, that's going to give me the contrast that I'm looking for. This hibiscus is actually a short stem because I had it in a bud vase previously. So it does depend if you're using a filler material or not. If you are, then you can probably just push that into the filler material like I'm doing here, and it will probably be fine. If you're not using any filler material and you just have a solid coloured vase, then you can take your floral tape and you can attach that to the flower that's going to sit next to it. But I would recommend just figuring out exactly where you want that flower to sit first before you do that. So I'm trying to position these flowers so they're all roughly about the same height, because that's going to give you a good shape to work with. So it's going to create a round shape, and then that's a good base for your other flowers to fit into. So next I'm going to add my chrysanthemums, and I want those to sit a little bit higher up. So I'm going to position those towards the top of my peonies and kind of equally between the peony and the hibiscus roughly. So it's almost like it's on the centre line between the two flowers. Again, it doesn't matter if this isn't exact and you can always adjust it later, but it just gives you a nice starting point. So again, I'm focusing on which colours I'm putting where. So obviously at some point you're going to have similar colours nearby each other, but if you can space them out as much as possible, that's going to help. So you can see I've got the coral chrysanthemum, and I'm going to put that next to a pink hibiscus and a lemon coloured peony. And I'm going to push that into the centre of the vase first of all, and then sort of wiggle that around a little bit until it sits towards the top of the peony. Now obviously my peonies are all slightly different sizes too, so that's going to be slightly different as you work your way around the vase, but that starts to look a bit more natural anyway, so I think that's fine. And then also I'm just going to adjust the heights of my stems again by folding them over, and I'm just going to keep rotating my vase so that I can see it from all different angles. The worst thing you can do is just to work on your vase from one side. If you stay still, you don't rotate the vase, you're never going to see what it looks like from the other side. So constantly keep turning it around, and then you can see what it's going to look like from different positions. Also try and remember to look at it from the top. I would recommend that you stand up and check yours rather than trying to tilt the vase like I'm doing. But for the purposes of showing you from camera, I've got quite a big hole in the top of my bouquet still, and that's fine. Next, I'm going to move on to my filler flowers and my foliage. This is one of the reasons why I recommend having a lot of foliage and a lot of smaller flowers. Even with such big flowers in your bouquet, you've still got a lot of gaps to fill, and these smaller stems are perfect for that. So I like to start with a stem of foliage first of all, and I try and put those between each of the flowers. And my preference is to have those sit at the very bottom of the bouquet and almost like bend down over the side of the vase. So you can see I'm just going to put those in between each of the flowers, push them right down into the bottom of the vase, and then bend the stem over. And it is going to look a little bit strange at first because they're going to be sticking out a little bit, but as we start to add more and more, those spaces will soon get filled up. So I'm just going to work my way around the whole bouquet, and I'm just going to add a stem of foliage each time. I'm going to also try and bend those slightly so that they stick out at the right angle. So you can either do that before you put it into the vase or once it's in there, whichever way you prefer. And then next I'm going to take my plumeria stems and I'm going to fill in all of the gaps. Particularly at the top of the bouquet there's quite a big gap, so I'm going to make sure to put plenty in those spaces. And you'll see I'm also folding over the bottom of my wires to get the right height as well. With these I want them to sit a little bit higher so that I get that nice curve on the top of the bouquet. As I'm putting each of these stems into my bouquet, I'm also just fanning out the branches, so it's going to cover more space, but also it's going to make them look more natural too. If any of the plumeria stems do get squashed as you're doing this, you can adjust those later, so don't worry too much about that. So you'll see that I am just adjusting those as I go, but I'll come back and tweak them at one final time when I'm done as well. So I like to take a second to just rotate my bouquet around and make sure I'm happy with everything so far, and just make sure I'm viewing it from all angles. And then I'm going to take my remaining hibiscus and I'm going to put those in towards the top of the bouquet. So I've got 3 left here, so I'm going to try and position those so that again the colours are not next to each other. So you'll see here I've got the yellow and the pink hibiscus near to each other, so that's fine. Obviously at this stage they are going to all be quite close to one another just because you've got so many flowers in there. But as long as they're not right next to one another, then they should look good. And then I'm going to try and make sure I have one very near to the top so that if you do look at the bouquet from above you'll see that rather than any gaps or viewing down into the vase. Obviously the height here isn't quite right, I want it to stick up so it's visible, but I'm really trying to maintain that curve on the top of the bouquet. So I want this to sit kind of in line with the others, but maybe slightly higher. And you might just need to tweak and move some flowers around as you do this. A lot of this process now is going to be tweaking and just adjusting slightly until it looks just right. Another thing I like to do, particularly with the chrysanthemums, because the flower has quite a small head, but obviously there's a lot of impact in that small space, I like that to be really visible. So what I do is just pull the stem out slightly so that I've got a bit more room to work, and then bend that over, which obviously wouldn't happen in nature, but that's the beauty of paper flowers, so you can make it look better than it would do in nature almost. So I want to bend just the very top of the wire so that it tilts towards you, so that when you're looking at the bouquet it's facing you rather than sticking up at a weird angle. And then I'm going to add in my last hibiscus into the final gap, and then I'm just going to adjust everything to make it fit properly and make sure that there's no more gaps left. You'll see also I'm pinching the bottom of some of my plumeria stems, and that's a good way to get them to sit back upright if they've flattened out a little bit. You just need to pinch that between your finger and your thumb at the base of the flower. And then all that's left to do now really is to just go back in and fill in any of the gaps with the foliage. So we haven't actually got too many gaps left now, which is good. But the good thing with the foliage at this stage is you can start to create more contrast. This is the bit I like to break up the colours by adding some foliage stems. And this time I'm just fitting those into any of the small gaps, and I try to adjust them so that some of the leaves stick out so you can see them quite clearly, but then some of the lower leaves might tuck underneath some of the flowers as well. So you kind of get that mix where you might see a glimpse of it between some of the petals, and also it might stick out and be quite visible. Particularly with the big flowers, I try to adjust those so that they sit forward of any of the leaves. Maybe the odd little bit of a leaf could overlap, but as long as the main flower is still quite visible and quite prominent. And if you need to pull that out slightly to get that to happen, that's fine. And then finally, I just do one more adjustment of all of the petals. I just slowly rotate the vase around and check that none of the petals have been squashed, make sure nothing's overlapping that shouldn't be, make sure there's no gaps, and just generally make sure there's a nice curve to the top and the sides of the bouquet, and that everything I want to be really visible is. So this is just a last check and adjustment just to make sure it's how I want it.
So hopefully you found that useful when it comes to arranging a large paper flower bouquet, and hopefully by this point you've actually created your own displays. I would absolutely love to see how they've turned out, so if you are happy to share them with me, then please do so. You can tag me on Instagram. I am at tarmuchley_paperblooms, and you can use the hashtag tarmuchleypaperblooms. I love to share anything you've created with my followers there and the wider paper flower community. So if you are happy to share, then just let me know, and hopefully that'll get some of your work out to the wider community too. If you have any questions or comments, then please make sure to drop those below the video here. I always do my best to respond to all of the comments, so if you do need any help with anything, then please just let me know, and I'll do my best to help. If you're using a smaller vase, or you're wanting to make more of a handheld bouquet for like a wedding, then my next video is going to be looking at how to take these same flowers and just arrange them in different ways, either using different quantities or different vases, or for doing a handheld bouquet as well. So hopefully by the time you've watched this video and the next one, you should be good to make all sorts of different displays. And the great thing is that once you've learned the basic techniques like this, you can then go on to apply those to all sorts of different ones too. So it's a great skill to learn. Also, don't forget, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do hit the subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. And also, if you didn't mind hitting the like button as well, that would be great. Don't forget, if you're still looking for new supplies for your paper flower making, maybe you're watching all the videos first before getting started, I have a whole section of my favourite materials and tools on my website. So if you head over there, you can see what I recommend you get started with. As I say, if you have any questions or comments, drop them below, and hopefully I will see you back here very soon for the next part in the series. Tarmuchley for being here to celebrate life's special moments with me.